One in every 100 children has autism, and this means that we are talking about millions of families who deal with this disability. The treatment market for autism has been valued at $2 billion in 2022, and it's expected to grow at a rate of 6.1% from 2023 to 2030. Within this huge market, we are talking about expensive therapies, medical interventions, and private schooling options that most families cannot afford. They face huge responsibilities financially and exist within an adverse economic climate. Some of the issues that a family with autism might be dealing with are unemployment, retrenchment, having medical insurance that doesn't cover therapy or only covers it in a limited way, or possibly not even having any medical insurance and needing to rely on a public healthcare system to support them for all their needs. In this episode, I'm going to be looking at this dilemma, and I'm going to be exploring some of the cost-effective strategies that families can use to support their children who have autism. At the outset, however, I have to stress that if these strategies are not employed with commitment and over a long period of time, then it is unlikely to benefit the child in the long term. And if it becomes clear after repeated efforts that what families do within their homes are not working, then professional or therapeutic intervention becomes necessary. Parents of children with autism are looking for solutions and for answers, sometimes even a cure, something that will alleviate the symptoms of autism. This is not a tendency that we need to criticize. It's a human response to the need of a parent to be able to help their child and somehow to give them a future. But in the last few decades, the market has become increasingly populated with an abundance of products and services. And these products and services all claim many things when it comes to autism. And one of the most common claims made is that an autistic child can recover, that he will be recovered and will no longer be autistic after years of receiving a particular treatment or therapy. Psychologists, therapists, and medical professionals have over time presented a whole range of therapies that we now begin to see as necessary for every autistic child, as something that will alleviate the symptoms of autism. So once a child is diagnosed, it sort of then flows as a natural consequence that the child has to go into this particular therapy. And one of these examples is, of course, speech therapy. Speech therapy is seen as one of the essential therapies that follows the diagnosis of a child with autism. And then on the other hand, we have a whole range of other therapies that have sprung up over time. Things like chelation therapy, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, vitamin and mineral supplements in large doses, and dietary supplements, which we refer to as biomedical interventions, neurofeedback therapy, auditory integration training, rigid exclusion diets where there may be no medical reason for this particular diet, and just so many other different types of therapies that you will find by just going online and Googling autism treatment. In 1987, the grandfather of assisted behavior analysis therapy, Dr. Lovas, proved that early intervention and intensive therapy enable children with autism to achieve success. He concluded that 90% of children making substantial gains through ABA therapy were then indistinguishable from their peers after receiving such intensive therapy. In other words, he was suggesting that virtually half of the children that formed part of his study had made a full recovery. Now, on the other hand, there are many other studies that dispute this claim and point to the many harmful aspects of the therapy and its failure to respect the humanity of the autistic individual. So what we have here are viewpoints that are stridently opposed. Where do parents place their trust? And equally importantly, where do they invest their money? There are also other treatments such as RDI, Relationship Development Intervention, Floor Time, Developmental Individual Difference Relationship-Based Model, and other programs such as the Sunrise program that also claims substantial results. But the evidence relating to the effectiveness of all these therapies is varied. In other words, for studies that confirm recovery, whether directly or indirectly, there are many other studies that raise many questions around these therapies. And I've included the link for you to be able to read up on some of this information. Then there's also animal-assisted therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, social skills training, physical therapy, educational therapy, and many other therapies. And all of them, in fact, can be substantially helpful, but the problem is that they involve significant financial commitments on the part of families. And families in this particular economic climate have to make very difficult decisions. And at the same time, they need to try and do what is best for their child to improve the quality of life of their child in the present and also long term. There is a staggering amount of money involved in any kind of autism therapy or education. In most cases, we are talking about long-term commitments that stretch over years, hours of therapy weekly, and fees that are charged per session. There are doctors' bills for consultations with psychiatrists, neurologists, clinical psychologists. There's also the cost of prescribed daily medications, and not all of which are covered by medical aids. And if your child is in a private school, there's monthly school fees. In South Africa, it can be as high as 10,000 Rand or more per month, and all related expenses for transport, textbooks, stationery, extramurals, and field trips. If your child is not at school and is in a home program, there are also significant costs involved in creating this the program, paying the consultant, training the therapist where applicable, and paying the therapist per session. There are, of course, all the other possible therapies and medical interventions available and all the costs that relate to them. In countries such as the USA and Canada, insurances do cover ABA therapy, but only up to certain limits, whilst in other countries such as South Africa, parents have to fund this therapy and all other therapies entirely out of their own pocket. Some OT and speech therapy is covered, but this cover is also subject to monetary limits. Then in South Africa, the government's inclusion policies do very little to support autistic children, so private schools and facilities and therapists end up filling this gap. And all these private businesses make money off the back of the government's failure to adequately support disabled children who are living in communities across the country. So in the long term, autism has a huge impact on the financial position of a family, in the present as well as in the future. And then for the future, parents also have to think about having to make financial provision for their child who has a disability at a time when they are no longer there, when they are passed on. Aside from services and therapies, there are tons of products on the market, all claiming, whether directly or indirectly, to benefit autistic children or their families in some way. Sensory toys, gym equipment, indoor equipment, special equipment, LED lights, vibrating cushions, special ramps and slides, tunnels, crash pads, apps and programs and online tools which need to be purchased to stimulate the learning of words and communication, and the list goes on and on. So there are thousands of educational resources available in the form of reference books and fiction books. Then there's also teaching cards and objects and all sorts of educational games and products. Then we also have tons of autism t-shirts, autism cards, autism bracelets, and all products that seek to create awareness about autism. And so I'm just highlighting how much is out there, how much is available. And when you are talking about parents who are doubtful, afraid, sometimes desperate, where are the places that they will invest their money. Every cent that they spend counts in the long term. Unfortunately, we have to face the fact that autism, like so many other things in this world, has become an industry, a way for many businesses and professionals to make money, even though at the same time they may provide substantial help. Many of the products and services are beneficial, but parents and families who are facing so many economic challenges and financial constraints have to ask themselves, where are we going to invest our money when it comes to the development of our child? And the parents of neurotypical children need to think so carefully about what they are spending in these trying financial times. And so the parents of autistic children need to be even more careful when it comes to their budgeting and planning. They have even greater financial burdens. They need to think about how to provide for a child with a disability in an uncertain future, for a time when they will no longer be around to care for their child. Every purchase, every session, every long-term commitment all adds up over the years. Here are some of the factors that may be relevant. How much are you able to budget for your child's needs? All therapies, services, and products must be accounted for within that one budget. How do you envision your child's future? If it's based on your child's abilities and talents, you think that he may be able to communicate, to develop a skill where he can generate an income in the future, then these are factors that need to be included in your calculation of the kinds of lessons and therapies that he will need. Do you want your child to be homeschooled or to have a tutor or to attend school? How important is it to you that he will need to receive social exposure? For how long do you envisage your child receiving a particular type of therapy? Let's say, for example, occupational therapy. So if, for instance, you commit to occupational therapy for a year, what are the specific goals that you want out of that year for your child? What are the skills and life skills that you want your child to acquire at the end of that period of therapy? The truth is that many parents send their children to therapy with no clear understanding of what is going to be taught or practiced. They rely upon the skills of the professional, which is not wrong, but they have no clear understanding of what their child is going to be learning during those sessions, what progress they are going to make, what is their own expectation. So the relationship with a therapist or tutor is taken on trust, and they go through a year without taking a step back at regular intervals to assess what is being done, what is their child achieving. It is simply taken for granted that because teaching and therapy is happening, that their child is on the correct path, that their child is making progress. However, this is not always a given. Parents need to take more control over what is happening, but at the same time need to place trust in a professional to be able to provide support and help, where at the end of a particular period there is agreement about what progress the child has made. Let's compare some costly strategies to some cost-effective strategies which may be available to parents who are not able to afford a more costly alternative. A slide, a tunnel, or other special autism equipment purchased for home installation versus the park or the playground, which is free. A book purchased from a specialist publisher versus a public library resource or a used book purchased from a book dealer. Educational games and cards which are purchased online or in specialist educational stores, these can be quite expensive, versus games that are played at home with your child requiring little or no resources, for example, simple matching games, art activities, building together, drawing, playing with the dice, ball play, water play, sand play. Therapists who charge per session versus where a parent cannot afford it, the parent or the carer trains and educates themselves, possibly with the help of a qualified therapist who is obviously paid for their time in order to instruct the parent. Then the parent or carer then engages with the child for fixed periods of time every day in order to stimulate communication and social interaction, and then consults with a therapist as needed or at intervals. Then educational therapy versus let's say daily reading or supported reading with the help of a parent or carer at a level appropriate to your child's development, a daily and weekly program with your child which incorporates many physical, fun and educational activities. Social skills training versus just having a parent, a carer, a sibling, or other extended family members becoming communicating partners with your child and engaging with your child regularly in ways that are suited to his development by having conversations with them, playing games with them, taking them out. Please refer to the book Communicating Partners by James MacDonald and my video How to Communicate with Autistics, where a child is taken regularly on outings with parents, family members, family friends. This is good because he's encouraged to communicate and to participate with others. Regular meetings and outings with family members and friends and family friends represent a protected situation where the child has an opportunity to learn to communicate, but where he is supported by the people who are around him. Animal-assisted therapy versus for those who cannot afford a support animal, just rescuing a dog or a cat from an animal shelter, encouraging your child to spend time with it, to play with it, to care for it, to feed it, to groom it. Many autistics even include pets in their daily activities and play. Then natural environment teaching, which is an informal part of ABA teaching, versus just mother, father, siblings, carers making a commitment to spend quality time daily with their child, both indoors and outdoors, playing games with them, encouraging social interaction and communication in the course of games and play. Physical therapy versus daily exercise according to a plan which incorporates gross motor development, balance, strength, posture, flexibility, exercises, the introduction of a sport which must be taught and should then be played at least once a week. So the alternatives that I've mentioned in the previous slides are not the equivalent of special therapies, of course, but they can be hugely beneficial. Families have to understand that they are not helpless, that they are not in the hands of outside parties who dictate the future for them. Outside interventions can be hugely helpful, but they are not always silver bullets, and this is something that we as parents need to understand. Yeah, I've listed a few cost-effective places which are available to families that do not involve really much money. Things like the zoo, botanical gardens, nature reserves, all of which involve a lot of physical activity, hiking and being outdoors. I'm not going to go through them. You can look at them, on your own time. But what I do want to say is that there is a lot that we can do with our children, a lot that we can expose them to. Many places where they can potentially learn about the world and receive social exposure as well as lots of physical exercise. As children who tend to dislike what is new or unfamiliar, autistic children will, however, need time to become accustomed to every new environment. So some planning is involved before we take our children out into the world. But the more they are exposed, the more they will learn, and the greater the likelihood that they will learn to enjoy the places that we take them to and the events and activities that they are involved in. So for all the alternatives that I've mentioned as being cost effective, the participation, the supervision, the commitment of a carer is necessary, and this has to be done regularly at fixed intervals over long periods of time. The alternatives that I've proposed do not replace therapy that is offered by a trained professional. They are not the equivalent of this therapy, but they are merely options that can be exercised where a family is in circumstances where they cannot finance specialized therapy. Many parents, however, do work long days and they cannot make many commitments. However, they may be able to make some kind of commitment, a single commitment, which will benefit their child in the long term. Let's assume that a father decides to read with his child for 15 minutes a day in the evening after supper, or to play a game, whether cognitive or physical, with his child every evening. Any game, any simple interaction that the child is capable of. For example, playing cards together, or playing a video game together, or building Lego together, and speaking while they are doing it, or trying to communicate while involved in it. By the end of the year, this father will have spent 182 hours of quality time with their child, let's say for 30 minutes a day, which will benefit the relationship with the child in the long term, as well as benefit your child's development. Ultimately, there's no way to get around it. More is required of a parent and a family that has a child with autism. Greater commitment in terms of the time that you are able to spend with your child, even if it seems that your child doesn't want this commitment from you or doesn't need it, because many autistic children just appear to be quite happy in their bubble, not needing any kind of interaction with you or anyone else in the family. This is the way autism appears. It appears to reject human interaction, but sadly, human interaction is what it needs the most, or rather happily, this is what it needs the most. For parents who can afford the therapists and the outside help, they are fortunate and they should do what's best for their child. But for those who can't make these kinds of commitments, it will be necessary for them to make their own individual commitments in relation to their child so that their child can achieve some level of progress. Parents, family members, family friends, and just the village, the community, will have to find ways to fill this gap and to work at it one day at a time, because there are no guarantees about what will happen in the future when it comes to disability. For parents who cannot afford special needs schools, private schools, they will need to approach the school closest to home and follow the route that is prescribed by the Department of Education or relevant education authority that will manage the placement of the disabled child. However, please remember, where your child is being denied an education by the government due to a long or unreasonable waiting period, so for instance your child is going months without being in school, without being placed, then you may need to seek legal assistance from your nearest legal resource center or legal aid center, as in most countries, a child does have a legal or a constitutional right to an education.